Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll show you how to use the Azure DevOps REST API with PowerShell. Why PowerShell? Well, PowerShell is very powerful, as you all know, and we can use it to do quick iterative tries of our functionality. It is highly recommended that you use VS Code to do your PowerShell work because it has IntelliSense debugging and it's very easy use. Note that everything that I'm doing now you can do in .NET. Your most important resource when you try to use PowerShell and the REST API is the Microsoft REST API site, which you can get to at this URL. This site has all the information you need to access the REST API for all the different sections of the Azure DevOps functionality. We have everything from work items to releases, to Git, to the different profiles, the service endpoint, the symbol server, the test plans. So there's information about pretty much everything you can get to in Azure DevOps, you can get through the REST API. And from this site, all the information is available. So when we do the demo a little bit later, I'll show you a couple of those different URLs so we can see what's available in here. Note that this is available both on-prem and in the cloud. There's different versions of API, which we'll discuss soon. So a typical request contains a verb and an instance URL, which we'll talk about in a minute, and the team project you want to access with areas and resource and a particular version. So the instance URL is essentially the URL that you need in order to access resources, and depending if you're on the cloud or in TFS, that's going to change. Your team project obviously is the name of your team project. Your areas is are we accessing release, work items, all of those major top areas we saw on the website. And the resource is a particular release in there. Is it a build information from one particular build? And then finally, the version API that for the cloud, currently they're at version 5, maybe 5.1. And for TFS, you can navigate to this particular URL and you'll see, depending on which version of TFS you have, there's different version going from 3 to 5 as well. So in order to access the REST API, you need to create a personal access token. So how do we do that? Under the profile section of when you're logged into your Azure DevOps account, you can go to the security part and then create a new path with all the access that you actually want for that particular path. And we'll do that before we actually start doing demos. So we'll use that path to create a header, and then we'll send that header to all of our calls when we use the invoke REST API. And finally, if you're on premise, you can also use your default credential, the /default credential at the end of your invoke REST API. That should work as well. So for the cloud, we need to access resource areas URL. And essentially, when you use this particular functionality, you give it the name of your account and you give it the resource that you're interested in. So resource management, extension management, etc. And then the GUID for that particular service that you're looking for. And then it'll return a URL in the form that we have here. So for example, release management is going to be https vsrm.dev.azure.com/your-organization. And for extension management, for example, there's an extmgmt.dev.azure.com. And then for most functionality, it'll be dev.azure.com/your-organization. And on-premise for TFS, it'll just be your TFS URL. So your organization :8080/TFS/default collection, for example, would be the URL that you would use. And those actually are very important because they change and you don't know what they're going to be. So in order to do that properly, we essentially just do this call. So https dev.azure.com/API/resource area. We give it an area ID. So for example, for build, it would be the second line in the table below. And then the rest of the information in this page. And then once we do that, it'll come back to us with the proper URL that we can use in our calls. So for the rest of the video, I will do some demos. So we'll call, for example, the REST API to get a list of projects in your account. We'll call the REST API to get the list of release attached to your particular project. We'll get the list of releases attached to this particular definition. Then we'll get a list of approvers for each of the releases. And then finally, we'll modify a release variable and we'll modify a work item just to show you how to update. So without further ado, let's go to our demos. All right, so first of all, we'll need to create a path in order to access the REST API for our project. So I'm going to go into my profile, and under the security menu item, I will come here and then I will basically create a new token. We'll call it video. We'll leave it for 30 days. We'll give it full access and then we'll create that. So this creates a particular path here that if we move off of this page, it'll be gone forever. So we'll keep that in our clipboard. All right, so let's jump into VS Code to do our demos. So we have the URL that I'm using for my Azure DevOps project. Then we use the personal access token we created a moment ago. Then we create our header by passing the token into a base64 function, and then basically using authorization equals basic and then the token that's been base64. Then we can actually start our first demo, which actually uses the list of projects. To do that, we can actually go to the URL here, and that'll give us a list of resource areas that we can see. There's quite a few, and each one of them has a particular GUID that we can use as a resource ID. So back here, I'm using the project GUID in order to get the base area I need in order to call my things. So this calls a function called getURL. And this function up here is basically a call to the resource area function and basically doing an invoke REST method. And when we get the result, we have the URL in question that we need and we move on. So we'll try and do our first demo. We'll run it in VS Code. So I'll put a breakpoint over here and we can just basically F5. After our code is started, we can F10 into our function and basically call the function here to get the URL. And when we see it comes back with, for getting the list of project, it's basically just dev.azure.com/our tenant. So we can now create a URL with this base URL to get the list of projects. And in order to see that, we can actually just go to this particular URL here, and we'll see that to call and get the list of project, we need to do this particular /API/projects and then the version that we want. So if we go back down, we see that we have /API/projects and then the API that we want. And then we'll basically just call the REST method again. And this will give us essentially a list of projects. I have 3 projects in this tenant, and then basically we'll just list them. So parallel build, TFS to Git, and then demo. So that basically is a very simple call to get the information about a project. So we'll reuse this list of projects we just created for our second demo, which essentially is the use of those projects, but we're going to get release definitions for those projects. So first of all, we'll get into our loop here with all of our 3 projects. We want to get the release management area ID, the base URL for the release management. And as we can see, this one is a little different. It uses vsrm.dev.azure.com and /our account. So now that I have the base URL properly, I can say use that base URL, use the project, the first one, because we're in a loop right now. And then the rest is the call to get the definition lists. So if we go to this particular URL, we see all the different information we can do to get a list of releases. So I'll continue with an F10, and here this will call all the different release for the parallel build. There aren't none in this project. So if we keep going, we're going to get our second project. There's also none in that project. And then the third one, which is our demo project, actually has a list of release definition. So we can actually just basically go through it and get the name of it. So if I go to my project, and I go back here and we get the demos project, which actually has the release, and we go to our pipeline, we'll see that we have our demo-ASP.NET Core-CI-CD, and that's the name of the release that it got here. So that's our second demo. The third demo is going to go in and go a little deeper. So it'll get the list of release definitions. So same call we did just now. Once we have our release definitions, we actually can dig in and get a list of all the definitions that are attached to this particular release. So here we can see that we're still in that release definition, and I'm going to call the API that's going to say, get me a list of releases for a particular release definition, right? So now I have the release definition that I have, and I can just dig in here and I'll see that I have 5 release that were done for this particular release. And then this function just says it's going to be release 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So if we go back to our project again, we'll see that we have release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which are shown over here. And the reason why we only see 5, because you saw on the site there seems to be a few more, is because when we made the call, we said return only the last 5 here. That was an addition we can add to our URL to basically not get all the release, but get a particular list of release. So essentially that's our third demo. Our fourth demo is a little bit different because now we have to dig in each one of those release definition and actually get to releases for that definition. And then if one of those release was actually approved by an approver, I'd like to list the name of that approver. So we're going to go again and we're going to do essentially the same thing we've been doing. So the first 2 projects don't have any release definition, so we're going to skip those 2. And then the third one actually has the demo project in here, and it says that it found 1 release definition. It's going to list that release definition over here. And then we'll dig in and we'll get all the releases for that definition. So essentially what we've been doing for the last 2 demos, but now we're going to actually dig into each one of those releases, and then in each one of those environments for those release, and then we're going to list the for each one of those environments, we're going to look at the pre-approval section of that release and look to see if it was not automated. So with releases, you can basically say that you want to have an automatic approver. So basically it's automated, it just goes off and it does its deployment without actually having a stop for an approver. And so it needs to be automated and approved status of approved. And if both are true, then go ahead and write who actually did that. So we'll basically just run through this, and we found that release 4 actually was approved by me on such and such a date. All right, so this is really interesting because the REST API gives you that information and much more, as you can see, but there's no report in VSTS to actually give you that kind of information. So actually using PowerShell to get that information and maybe save that as a CSV file or another JSON payload in order to do another report for somebody is very important, very interesting that you can actually do that. So we'll keep moving. We'll go to our 5th demo, and our 5th demo essentially is we're going to update a release variable into our release. So if we go to our release and we edit it, we'll see here that this one has some variable, and the first variable is called demo, and then it has a value called old value. So we'll modify this value to be another value. So we're going to do pretty much everything we did, the same thing we've done for the last 2 or 3 demos, and we're actually going to dig in all the way to here. So I'll just put a breakpoint over here and just run through because we've seen that before. And now that I've actually am here, One of the call that we want to do is we want to get environments. We want to expand the environment's information, because by expanding that, we can actually go and get environment variables that are part of this environment. So for each one of those environment, I only have one here, which is dev. So as I'm going into, I can actually dig in and look at all the environments and look at all the variables attached to this particular environment. So if we go here and we look at variables, we'll see that there's one called demo, and it has a value of old value. So first of all, here I'm checking, is there a variable called demo? And if there is, just write me the value of what it was there before. So it was old value before. We'll modify that to be new value. We'll save all this, and then we'll call an update so that we modify the actual release, and then we'll check in the result if it's a new value now. So now it says new value, which is the value we've put here. If we go to the website and we actually refresh this, we'll see that now the variable is going to be called new value. So that changed it directly on the site. So for the last demo, we're going to call a work item, and we're going to modify the title of it. So we need to get the work area ID, GUID, and then get the base URL for it. And we can see that the base URL essentially is dev.azure.com and our project. And we're going to basically fix it to work item number 1, which if we go to our project, we can actually see in our boards. We'll have work item number 1 is a demo feature here. And what we want to do is we want to change the title of this and add a plus demo at the end. So essentially, we're going to call the work item to get the actual work item payload. And then we're going to modify the body for this. We're going to get the value of the title field, and we're going to add plus demo at the end. And then basically we're going to update that. So I'm just going to run through this again. We're going to get the work items. So if we look at this work item, we see the list of fields. So all the fields that we have here, including the title, which says demo feature. We're going to create a new body for this. So this says the before title is demo feature. We're going to change the title of this, call, and then just basically get the title again. And we see it's called demo feature plus demo. And if we look here and we refresh our browser, we can see that we have demo feature plus demo. So as you can see, using PowerShell to call the REST API is quite simple, and it's very powerful. We can run through, do some debugging, and actually get all the tailored information that we need in order to create other reports, specific custom tasks, anything that we need to talk to TFS and or Azure DevOps we can use PowerShell to do it. So thank you for listening. See you next time.